facial recognition tech. But even though the GDPR might make it more obvious to you that you are being surveilled, it still doesn't do anything to guarantee that the underlying algorithms are based on anything that's unbiased, or that the accuracy of any of this tech has been independently audited. It does not do that. There's also the fact that in a global economy, non-GDPR-based tech will absolutely still be produced and sold and get used everywhere, including in Europe by people who think that they're not going to get caught. There is also the fact that the Australian government, in between bouts of infighting, is still considering things like the Identity Matching Services Bill, which has been sitting before the House of Representatives since early last year. They haven't gotten around to it. They've been busy, apparently. So this bill aims to draw together a database of all the people, all the faces, all the pictures of people from passports, from driver's licenses, from criminal records, immigration data, other documents, and then to match that with information that the government has about our identities, which is usually quite a lot. Then it wants to give Peter Dutton's Department of Home Affairs access to this whole capability. And they literally call this tech the capability, with a capital C, which does not sound cartoonishly evil in the slightest. Then there's the Assistance and Access Bill, which Ben spoke about earlier. So this legislation was rushed through in this completely reprehensible and unconsidered manner last month. It means that any Australian or anyone living in Australia can be asked by the Australian government to create backdoors in almost any software or face jail time. We really can't expect realistic algorithmic transparency or any kind of provable accuracy in facial recognition tech when it's become possible for literally any line of code to arbitrarily be a state secret, and for rogue versions of facial recognition technology to be deployed to random devices all over the place. But even though algorithmic transparency is still a complete pipe dream, striving for it matters now more than ever in a world where we have the Assistance and Access Bill, Donald Trump is president of the United States. Every day, things just seem to get weirder and worse for basically everybody. We need to continue to ask questions and to talk to each other and to be alert to the uses and abuses of biased tech. We need to challenge the fancy statistics that we see when it comes to facial recognition accuracy and ask ourselves if what we're hearing is marketing or independently verified fact. Because right now, most of it definitely isn't unbiased, and most of it definitely isn't accurate for everybody. It's also almost impossible to know which facial recognition systems can be trusted to be socially and ethically responsible. My guess would be probably 0 of them. As a final note, I am not here to make the case that facial recognition technology has no place in the world. There are cases like in international border crossings where it can sometimes be useful, and there are cases like unlocking an iPhone where it can be really convenient. But there are also cases where recognition is performed on us and used to draw conclusions about us that we currently don't have any real way to meaningfully interrogate and that we can't necessarily trust. And I'm here to urge caution in where these things are deployed, and to urge for the creation of more skepticism and more openness, better data sets, and clearer ways to know whose technology is being used under the hood. And if we're all aware that facial recognition is going to be invisibly performed on us, in the absence of change from the top down, I would encourage you all to think about how you might become invisible to it in response. Thank you. Like escalators, train station ticket, public tech use, facial recognition technology. Over the next half an hour, I'll show you how this tech works, where it gets used, and how it can be broken. And we'll also talk about why it's important to keep being critical of facial recognition technology, even though legislation like the GDPR promises to make it easier for this tech to not be used without your informed consent. So let's start with the science fiction version of facial recognition. So this is the intro for the American television series, Person of Interest. There's a lot of high-tech, sci-fi face detecting going on. You know, we're connecting faces with identities, we're interpreting moods, linking phone call metadata, all of that stuff. It's really great fiction, but reality has already stepped over this threshold. So you might have seen this clip online before. In September 2017, this clip of traffic surveillance cameras at a Chinese intersection surfaced online. And because we live in the era of fake news, it's easy to be skeptical about all these short clips that claim to be unveiling this near-futuristic tech. But this is actually real software running on a live system. And here's a better screen capture of that same software. The labels are in English this time instead of in Mandarin, but they are still probably too small for you to read, so I'll tell you what it's doing. It's detecting the basics of the things that are in the video stream in front of it. Is this thing a car? Is it a bicycle? Is it a pedestrian? Is it a truck? If it's a car, what color is it? You can also see it highlighting the paths that everybody's taking as well. And if it thinks it sees a pedestrian, it will then start describing what gender it perceives that person to be, the approximate age for the person, what they might be wearing, is it pants, is it a dress, that kind of thing. And having access to this kind of capability makes it really easy to track somebody across a busy city, even in China where there's a population of over 1 billion people. And you can see at the sides of the screen where the software is pulling out a lot of still images. It'll use those and store them to compare them to images later on for reference. And SenseTime, which is the company that makes this software, have another product called SenseFace, which does exactly what it says on the tin. SenseFace picks up live streams from cameras at places where people will pass through with their faces clearly visible to the screen. That's places like escalators, train station ticket barriers. Their software will match the features from the faces that they see with the faces that they already have on file. And the Chinese government requires an ID card for every citizen over the age of 18, which is also what this technology was trained on. So there's not only a ready-made government database to compare this to, but also it's almost certainly seen every single one of these faces before, so its results are extremely accurate because this is its training set. It can be really easy to look at this kind of stuff and dismiss it out of hand because we hear a lot that the general attitude of the Chinese public to things like privacy and surveillance are fundamentally different to the attitudes to those things in other countries, but systems like this absolutely get used in other places. The United States in particular gives us a number of egregious examples, and this isn't just because Silicon Valley keeps coming up with new things that it decides to embed facial recognition technology into, but also because of the diversity of the state-by-state laws in that country. It's led to some really extreme use cases. One among the many things that Amazon's been criticized for recently is for selling cheap access and consulting services to local US law enforcement agencies that want to use its recognition API. And at a time when people are unjustly targeted by law enforcement in the US and many other places every day because of just the color of their skin, it's really troubling to learn that yet another closed-source proprietary algorithm is being mixed into law enforcement processes without any kind of apparent oversight. And it's partly because of things like this that a lot of the loudest critical and ethical research into facial recognition technology also comes from the United States. This is Joy Buolamwini. She is a researcher at MIT Media Labs. She is one hell of a poet, and she's campaigning really hard for more transparency around how accurate facial recognition tech can be. In 2015, Buolamwini founded the Algorithmic Justice League to raise awareness of the social biases that are built into facial recognition tech. And she started it because her own research projects into facial recognition technology and augmented reality were extremely difficult for her to finish because everything that she tried was full of this proprietary algorithm that had been trained on heavily biased data sets that had failed to recognize her dark skin as a human face. So in order to complete her work, she had to resort to holding a white mask over her face or to get one of her lighter-skinned colleagues to perform the experiment for her because the data sets weren't picking her up. So in December 2017, under the umbrella of the Algorithmic Justice League, Buolamwini published a comparative study of the accuracy of 3 commercially available facial recognition APIs. She looked at Face++, Microsoft's Azure Face API, and IBM's Watson. And she found that there was an overall trend towards accuracy, but only if you were a lighter-skinned, male-presenting person. And there were many, many more false matches if you were a darker-skinned or a female-presenting person, or especially if you were both of those things. Her work also highlighted just how opaque a lot of these algorithms are. So while everyone's running around copywriting and closing off the algorithms and the data sets that make up their secret source facial recognition systems, almost nobody is actually independently auditing any of these things. Most of the statistics that we have about how accurate any given facial recognition API is come from the companies that sell them. This is not science, this is marketing. And when this kind of tech gets sold to third parties and used to make decisions about who gets to be arrested and who should be detained, there is really no recourse for any kind of justice. And it's not just bias based on skin color either. Some of you may have seen this study. Late last year, a pair of researchers from Stanford University published a study that claimed to be able to use facial recognition to detect whether or not somebody was homosexual or heterosexual. I yelled so loudly when I read this paper that one of my neighbors came over to see if I was okay. Because while the algorithm absolutely does take pictures of human faces and it assigns them a rating of gay or straight, the way the algorithms underneath were set up completely ignored the idea that anybody might be bisexual or asexual, or that gender exists on a spectrum instead of as a strict binary. And yet all over the news, people were talking about this stuff as some kind of magic, scientific facial recognition gaydar, instead of questioning what really is pseudoscientific phrenological nonsense. Nobody really questioned it, mostly because it used phrases like facial recognition and machine learning. And so, of course, it must be cutting edge and accurate. But it isn't just the law enforcement agencies and the headline-grabbing researchers that use this kind of tech. Facial recognition is used in marketing and advertising contexts far more often than anything else, and many times even with less public scrutiny and awareness and oversight. This, for example, is the maintenance interface of a digital advertising screen from a shopping mall in Canberra, in Australia. This was taken in October 2017. You can see it there detecting the faces of the two people in front of it. In Australia, it is very common for digital advertising screens to do this. A lot of them are equipped with cameras. They're right up the top of the little monolith-looking thing, and they're pre-installed with tracking software. This one's running software by a French company called Quividi, who they specialize in commercial applications of facial recognition. So the Westfield Corporation, which operates the shopping mall where that particular screen was found, runs many other shopping malls all across Australia and New Zealand and Europe and North and South America. And using advertising screens like that one, they detect what they think is your age and your gender and your mood. And then they correlate this information with data from your smartphone pinging off their complementary Wi-Fi routers all around the malls to make a real-time map of where people are, what advertising they should be showing to these people, tracking suspicious-looking kinds of people for security incident purposes, and to work out whether they can sell everybody everything else. When this made news in Australia in 2017, Westfield was contacted for comment, and a spokeswoman for Westfield said that they do this stuff to connect customers with retailers in a more meaningful way. I'm not actually sure what that sentence means, because as someone who's walking around that kind of mall, I don't feel a special relationship to anybody, especially if I don't know that this kind of tracking is happening. Connection is a two-way thing, and if I'm not participating, it's not a connection. But Westfield isn't the only retail operator who does this kind of thing inside of shopping environments. So in May last year, Foodstuffs, the parent company who runs the New World and the Foursquare supermarkets in New Zealand, among other things, they got a lot of press when it came out that they were using facial recognition technology in their stores to try to detect shoplifters. This only came out because they used this tech to apprehend a visitor to one of their supermarkets who, it turned out, wasn't actually the person that they were after. So this cutting-edge technology got a lot of bad press for being used to persecute people for crimes, which clearly didn't work very well. But even more than that, people were angry that this kind of technology was in use every time they stopped by to get a loaf of bread, and they hadn't been informed about it. Even churches have been getting in on the facial recognition action in the last few years.